This
Thanks so
conference
much
will
for having
now be recorded.
me. My name is Annie Barrow, and again, I'm the manager of Sustainable Landscape Services. I have a little bit of feedback here, guys. I don't know. All right. So we're going to talk today about right plant, right place, and right practice. You've probably heard the term right plant, right place before. It's a pretty normal horticultural mantra, but right practice is something sort of new, right? So here's a picture of one of our gardens at Denver Botanic Gardens. This is our Rhodes Water Smart Garden. This is in late May, early June. This garden doesn't receive a whole lot of water. It maybe gets watered maybe once a week. And this is what you can get if you want to do a low water landscape and you do it correctly. Unfortunately, what I've found in practice is that people think of landscapes and xeriscapes, and they think of this image. And they take the idea of xeriscape and put this rocks in their home or very few plants. And we want to move away from that because that's not really what a xeriscape can be and should be. We want to make sure that we're still using plants in our landscapes, and there's a great way to do that, as we saw on the slide previously. So I'll talk today about how we can achieve that. The other thing that I see often, I've been doing this program for about 5 years now, and what I see working with industry folks and doing peer reviews with landscape architects is they're doing a lot of the same practices that we've been doing in the East and the Midwest. And so here you see typical plants that you would find in other less arid regions, and then you're seeing practices in landscape construction that work somewhere else, but they don't really work here. Here is another example of a beautifully low water, I don't like to say xeriscape because again, it makes me think of those rock gardens, right? So this is a low water landscape that is in a public park. So if you're worried or thinking, oh, well, if I have all these plants, I'm going to have to do a lot of management. This is not the case. Most public parks don't have the staff to manage and maintain on a weekly basis. At best, maybe you get people out there on a monthly basis. So this is a park called Kendrick Lake in Lakewood, and it's been established for about 15 years or more. And it's incredibly low maintenance. The irrigation breaks all the time, and it still looks as good as it does in this picture. So it's really achievable to do a great landscape that's colorful, lush, beautiful. We don't have to sacrifice plants and interest. We just have to know how to do it right. So if you've been here for a while, you are familiar with the scenery here. This is a high plains steppe. This is the region, the climate that we live in Colorado along the Front Range. So a steppe climate, how many people are familiar with what a steppe climate is? Raise your hands. A couple people. So a steppe climate is essentially a high elevation location that is next to a mountain range, and that mountain range prohibits the rain, it's called a rain shadow effect, from reaching the plains adjacent to it. So we're high elevation and we're low water, bottom line, right? And our ecology is essentially a high plain steppe and a high prairie short grass prairie. So you see in this picture what's typical in our native ecology, which is short grass. And then whenever we see trees and larger materials, they're along a waterway, right? Cottonwoods, willows, alders, those are always usually naturally going to be growing along a waterway. Otherwise, we're seeing just the short grass prairie, some mixed forbs, and so on. Now, when you think about horticulture and the roots of horticulture, to me, I think of places like Versailles or Padua or European gardens where really horticulture began to make its mark on civilization and our culture. And England, when we moved to the Americas, we moved to the Eastern Seaboard, which has a very similar climate to Europe. A lot of rain, wooded forests, rich soils, so on. But when we moved west in the Americas, we've moved to an environment that really doesn't reflect anything in Europe. In fact, there's no steppes in Europe. There are steppes in Patagonia, South Africa, Mongolia, and here in North America. So horticulture that's been brought over from England or Europe really doesn't address the climate and cultural conditions that our plants are facing, which is really dry, low humidity, semi-arid conditions. So we receive about, on average, 14 inches of precipitation a year. That can be in the form of snow. We've gotten a lot of that this year. We also are higher up, so our UV is really intense. That makes a big difference. If you've ever been outside and you didn't wear sunscreen, you get burned really fast. That's not true at other places. It's cloudy, it's not intense UV, and so on. Our soils are one of the biggest factors in that we are not in a woodland area. So because we don't have leaf litter and natural debris falling to the soils, we're left with a very lean and rocky soil. And of course, we have to deal with things like heavy wet snows late in the season that can break branches, hail, which is a nightmare for vegetable gardeners early season. And again, this is typical of any kind of steppe climate that we're looking at. And typically, when you think about horticulture in the Midwest, in the East Coast, in the areas where we've brought it over to the West, we're dealing with a much more humid climate. We're getting 40+ inches of precipitation versus 14. It's certainly not high UV, and there's a lot of overcast and cloudy days. And we have very rich soils there because it's naturally wooded and forested land, right? So one size does not fit all. And what we've been doing is using horticultural methods that have been working for us in other areas and putting them to work here, and they're failing. And we keep doing that, and that's really insane because keep doing the same thing expecting different results, it's not going to work. So we're going to talk about what do we need to do differently today? How do we adjust horticulture for this region? So right plant, right place, as I said, is mantra that most horticulturists know. But right practice is somewhat new to us. It's what I've been working on since I've gotten to the gardens. And it's what the gardens have been doing for a long time, but we just haven't been talking about it. And the first thing I want to talk about in right practice is soils. In fact, that is the main thing I want to talk about today. So soils aren't something you can fight with. Mother Earth is going to win. We can't change the pH. We can't change significantly in large spaces what we have. So we want to work with what we have rather than against it. So the typical applications would be to add organic matter to your soil. And here, if we're thinking about low water or water smart or sustainable gardens, we want to use plants that are going to thrive in a dry climate and not require supplemental irrigation and other inputs, such as compost, to our soils. So what we've found is working with an inorganic material to amend your soil is the best way to go. Now that's pretty starkly different from what we are taught when we study horticulture formally. But I'll tell you why this works. When we incorporate rock or minerals into the soil, we're creating porosity into a very fine clay, sandy soil. That porosity allows the water to reach down into the root zone very quickly. It penetrates the soil quickly, it doesn't evaporate, and it creates airflow for our plants. So they're getting the oxygen exchange that they need. So we use, I often use a product called Squeegee Rock. It's a strange name. It's called Squeegee Rock. It's a 1/4 inch and smaller, so it's all the way down to sand. It includes a matrix of sizes. And we mix that into the soil. And again, the plants that we're going to plant are going to be thriving in lean soils. Now I have attached, and you all will receive a plant list that's about 8 or 9 pages long, with all sorts of plants that will thrive with this kind of amendment. And we'll talk about those later. This is recommended, the soil amendment is recommended for xeric and low water plantings. So if you're planting annuals or vegetables, those are heavy feeders and they're gonna need that rich soil. So I'm not saying this is a practice for everybody, everywhere, all the time. But if you want a low water garden, this is a great way to amend your soil and really reduce the amount of water that you're putting down. So what do? How do you actually implicate the squeegee? So what you would do is that you would remove an area of turf or vegetation where you want to focus on putting your new garden. Remove all that away, whether it be existing plants and mulch, or if it's just the turf. And you'll probably end up with about 3 inches missing when you take away turf or if you have mulch down. So then you're going to fill in, don't plant anything, you just fill in with squeegee or squeegee rock or pea gravel or crushed granite. There's a lot of things you can use. I'm going to just talk about squeegee today. It's easier. You can get this delivered. About a ton will cover 100 square feet. So that's a 10 by 10 area per ton. That's almost like getting a yard of mulch. It's the same price as mulch and compost, so you're not paying any more for this. And you get them to, when they deliver this, you have the site prepared so they can just dump it right into the garden spot, right where you want it. Have them back up the truck right into the area where you want to dump that squeegee. You spread it around, and then you place your plants. And you plant individually, amending the backfill. So when you plant a plant, you dig a hole, and what you take out is called backfill. You're going to take that backfill soil that you took out of the hole, and you're going to mix it in with the squeegee you just dumped all over. And you're going to put the plant back in the ground and then put squeegee all around it. You're going to do that for all of the plants in the area. And then when you find that there might be a little spot where you've used too much squeegee and there's not enough covering as mulch, you're going to add some more squeegee. Even it out, grade it out, make it look nice and neat. This is how you would do this in a home landscape. I work typically to assist water-wise landscapes for municipalities, water providers, and again, other commercial projects with developers and landscape architects. So sometimes we do things a little bit differently on a bigger scale, but this is a sort of a residential approach to how to manage working with squeegee rock. And really what we're doing is we're just following nature's cue. This is not us creating this whole new idea. This is just what we see in the natural world out here. This is Penstemon perryi. This is probably growing in Arizona, so it's not Colorado, but you get the idea. You can see the land is rocky. It's rocky, it's sandy, it's not rich, there's no mulch. This is how it grows naturally. It likes it that way. The plant on the right is a plant select plant that's been cultivated for ornamental features. So it's more floriferous, it's fuller, it's a nicer looking plant. But you can see here, we planted it in rock because that's what this plant likes. And I'm not the one here telling you because I came up with this idea. I'm telling you because this is what we've been doing at the gardens for a long time. And we just, again, haven't really been talking about it because water hasn't become to the forefront until recently, even though it's kind of been an issue this whole time. But now that we're looking at water, we need to start thinking about these things. So if you walk around the Botanic Gardens and you actually look at the mulches, which usually you don't look at that when you're at the gardens, but if you look down and look at the mulches, you'll see there's no big wood chips. We're using rock in a lot of our areas for mulch. So we've been doing this for 20, 25 years. Some of the folks at the gardens, like Dan Johnson and Panayiotis Kaletis, been there 25, 30, 40 years doing this method. So we've seen it work, and I've seen it work in projects that I've recently installed. And so we're starting to really talk about it. And more recently, we're going to be doing some soil science research on this to get some data to better understand why. Why does this work so well? Because we know it works, but we really want to get some data behind it to help understand what are the processes that this is improving upon. Here's a job where we literally took out 12 inches of soil. Now this is a case where we're in a median. There's rebar, there's concrete chunks. This is really, really urbanized, poor soil put in there. So we took it out, 12 inches of it, we took it out and we put in a 1-to-1 ratio of squeegee rock and garden topsoil. That's all that is for 12 inches deep. And we watered it the first year, and the second year we turned the water off. And this is what the second year looked like on the right. First year, this is what it looked like when we put it in. We were able to turn off the irrigation, and we only put on the irrigation now in August and September when we have 90-degree days for weeks upon weeks, and it's dry as can be. So it's really feasible to turn off your water and have a gorgeous landscape. And this is a median, which is one of the hardest places to grow things because you're dealing with pollution, traffic, salt, urban heat island, all of those things. There is a place for fine organic mulch. So squeegee isn't the answer to everything, right? But I would say that if you're going to plant a garden, say that is full of roses or more traditional plants that feed heavier, you can still amend the soil and use the squeegee to create the porosity that we're looking for. And then you can mulch it with fine organic mulch, 1 inch and smaller. So less than a quarter size is the kind of mulch we're looking at. Sometimes it's called soil pep. Sometimes it's just called fine composted mulch. It's hard to find bagged, but it can be found, and it's certainly available in bulk. And the reason that we want to do this is, again, it's just going to be finer, and so it's not going to hold water, and it will get down into the plant root zone. So you can also use compost when you're amending with squeegee. If you wanted to grow, again, like roses love food. So if you're planting a rose and you want it to be in a xeric garden, there's nothing wrong with adding squeegee and compost and then mulching it either with this organic mulch or using squeegee. It's up to you. The idea is that you want to use fine organic mulch in places where it's appropriate. So in places where you have dry shade, right? It's not blasting hot. This is a place where a lot of plants that you're going to be planting are going to be native to a dry shade area, which would be not the high plains, but a woodland. So putting down fine compost will actually help them and benefit them. But again, it's okay to use squeegee when you amend that root ball and that planting area. If you have large existing trees need food, they need more water. So we want to make sure that we're feeding them and giving them what they need. So the fine mulch under a large existing tree makes a lot of sense. And then of course, any plants that are feeding heavy. So edible plants, plants that you might want to grow that aren't native or xeric, roses, etc., gooseberry, that sort of thing. The reason we don't want to use large mulch is because it doesn't break down. This is an idea of emulating a forest condition, large mulch, right? And in the Midwest, you really have to replace it every year. But here what happens is there's not enough micro or macro biota in the soil. There's not enough water to encourage decomposition, which is what mulch is supposed to do. Is it's supposed to decompose and feed the plant over time. It's not just for weed barrier, because it does also help with that, but one of the things that wood mulch does out here is it holds water and it's dark. Now, you guys know how dry it is out here. And if it's holding water and it's dark, it's quickly going to evaporate before it can get down to the soil that, especially if it's not been amended with clay or with squeegee and it's all clay, it's hard enough for that water to get down there. So a lot of people just end up watering their mulch and not their plants. And that's why we see so much attrition in the field, right? It also holds water close to the plant's crown. So if it is indeed a xeric plant, it's really going to resist that and tend to rot out. So putting down wood mulch and bark and having that water be held up against the crown will probably kill a lot of your xeric plants. Now that's a lot of information. Again, I'm not just pulling this out of, oh, I think this is a neat idea, but we've been doing this at the gardens for a long time. And so here you can see the type of mulch and the size that we're looking at in one of our gardens. And again, I encourage you to visit us and don't just look at the plants, but check out what kind of mulches we're using. I want to pause there because that's a lot of information that goes into stark contrast to probably what you've been doing or what you've learned. So I'm going to just pause and take some questions or comments or feedback that you might have about inorganic materials and mulches and so on. Andy.
So let's say you have a small garden, you don't have access to the truck, and you don't want all the time or sweetie, which I have. Can they dig out an area for a plant and then that spot and then put the plant in? Would that be a good way to make it accessible for them?
Yeah, if that is overwhelming to get a truck into the yard and dump a ton, the next best thing you can do is remove all of your wood mulch that's really large. And if your plant's already existing, don't mess with it. Just put a little pea gravel around it. And then if you're going to plant something new, just amend the backfill and then put a little squeegee around the base of it. It won't look cohesive because it'll take you time to fill in the whole area with the right rock mulch. But that's a way to do it in a manageable way, maybe 3 plants at a time. And I do know that Nick's Garden Center will sell like a 5-gallon bucket of squeegee, which is super manageable, and you could do a couple perennials with that. So that is an option. In the back.
Like, whether you would recommend using, like, I know I have plenty of leaves from the fall that are still hanging around, or kind of like use as mulch, as, you know, that smaller mulch that will break down, the pine needles. And then, and like, what about like home compost?
So the question is about using existing leaf litter, pine litter, and or compost in the yard. So the first question with the pine and the existing leaf litter, the only issue with using that as a mulch is that it will blow away. So it's probably something you want to mix into your compost, in fact. And then when you do go to amend the soil with your squeegee, add some of that compost in there. It's okay to mix squeegee and compost and make the soil rich. The idea is to get the porosity working so that that water can get right down to the zone and there's aeration.
And Annie, we have a question online.
Okay, can you read that out?
Is it Callan or Kalen?
It's pronounced Colin.
Oh,
But really quickly, so what squeegee
we
work
can't
up
hear
in-
you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, actually, hang on. It's my fault. Okay, try
You can't
again.
hear me? Oh yeah. Would squeegee work up in Vail, Colorado?
Absolutely. This is excellent for high elevation, low elevation, anywhere where we have the lean soils. In Vail, they do use it in their gardens, the Botanic gardens up there. We've done plantings in Steamboat. We've done plantings in Black Hawk, Fraser. We've used this method there as well. Yes. Question.
Into this sort of thing, would you still let the yard under? Would you remove the top layer?
So the question is removing turf that may or may not be in great shape, and how do you convert that? What I would do is I would either use a spade, a square spade, shovel, and remove the root zone of the Kentucky bluegrass or whatever it is, and that'll remove about 3 inches, including the grass and its root zone. I would dispose of that, or you can put it in your compost. Or you can also get a sod cutter if it's a large area. You can rent one, and it's a really manageable thing to do for larger areas. I would not rototill. What that does is it tends to bring up all the weed seeds that are below and waiting. So when we rototill, it can just be turned into a weed management nightmare. It's better just to put the squeegee down on top of that once you've removed the turf, and then plant as you go, amending that backfill. Any other questions over here?
Yes, if you wanted to replace your entire yard and put that in a lot of work, but then the yard over here, everybody else around, like mine, you know. You're the only one that has mouths of plants.
So the question is, you know, how does it look when you're the only one with squeegee and right next to you, you're lined up with turf or mulch or what have you? And that's a really good question because it's all about design there. So working with a professional designer might be really helpful in that case to help them soften those edges. One of the things that we're working on right now, on Monday, we're going to be removing all of the turf in our right-of-ways at York Street on the east side. And we have 2 welcome beds that are mulch and heavy feeding plants, a lot of annuals, zinnias, et cetera. And we have to figure out a way, exactly that, how to transition from here's a line of mulch and it's literally a line and then all squeegee from there on out. And our idea is actually to put a few boulders next to, in between the space, and then also share some ground cover that would grow in both areas and sort of blend into, so it doesn't look like there's a line separating. Other things you could do is, you can install like a western looking fence, or you could put in some kind of dry riverbed or a line of shrubs or grasses that sort of soften the edge so that it doesn't look like a sore thumb standing out. Eventually know that the goal of using squeegee is not to have squeegee rock showing, but rather to grow the plants so that the vegetative coverage is what you're looking at. So eventually, after you've planted it, even if there is a big line of, oh, it's definitely turf here and something else here, your plants will cover that in and it'll just look like a garden. That's the goal. Yes.
Our neighbor at 22nd and Eagle, southwest corner, ripped out a section of the garden last year, rock down. And initially it looked like all rock, and his plants came up, and it looked phenomenal, and the cover most of it up. So, secondly, what's the difference between vermiculite, perlite, and rock?
Vermiculite, perlite, and squeegee rock. So vermiculite and perlite are manufactured. And they will likely break down. And in fact, there's a shortage of perlite going on right now. It's not something that's typically used in the soil that we use in landscape. Vermiculite and perlite is typically used in a soil mix when we're potting things, whether it be annuals or vegetables or houseplants. The squeegee rock is a mineral. It will never break down. Once you put it down, you don't have to replace it with a new layer of mulch. The only reason you might do that is someone kicks it or it moves around a little bit. But it's not a particle of soil, but rather a rock. So that would be the difference between those. Does that answer your question? One more? Yes. Yes, sir. So if you have a lot of wood chips or big, large mulch in your yard, I would remove it and replace it with pea gravel, crushed, some kind of rock is going to help. And the smaller rocks are best because when we get into cobble, we don't get the infiltration. And we also run into breaking your neck problems because you don't want to walk on cobble, right? So smaller rock is better for infiltration. If you wanted to use the fine mulch instead of the wood mulch, you can use that. Again, that's hard to find store-bought, but it is, I think soil pep might be bagged and available, and otherwise you can get it delivered. Okay, one more. We'll take some more questions at the end too. So the cedar mulch, if it's this big and mixed sizes, cedar mulch, I'll show you what I have here. So cedar mulch would be like shredded hardwood mulch, and that is too big. And that will not break down because again, it's just not wet enough. We don't have the fungi and the little critters and insects and all the life in the soil that a woodland has. So it's just not going to break down fast enough. And it's also going to create a barrier for water. And by the way, so will weed fabric. So we don't use weed fabric. It's another layer of barrier for water to get into the soil. And it's not effective in stopping weeds. You pull the weed out of it, you rip it, and it's over. So it's really limited in its use. And when you do use squeegee to mix your soil and prepare your ground, it's easy to pull those weeds out because it's really loose. You may want to water before you start weeding because in the summer, it can get really hot and that squeegee can bake and it can become a little crusty. But if you water it, it's immediately very, very tangible and you can play with it. So I just want to make sure we get through the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to pause on the questions, but we'll do some more after. And I'm just going to talk about one more of the right practice, and then we get to talk about plants. So right practice, hopefully you guys are all doing this, but it's a really good idea to plant small. Most people, we're American, we want something big, we want a big SUV, big TV, but you got to realize that plants are going to grow. They're going to grow and they're going to get big. So you want to plant a small plant, and this is why. Because if you plant a plant that has a very equal root to shoot ratio, then it can very quickly establish equilibrium and self-sustain itself. So it's not going to rely on irrigation, which will fail, or a crazy day of weather where it's just super stressed out. The quicker a plant can get to a place, if it's the right plant, if it's a xeric plant, and it has enough roots to manage its top and its shoots, it can maintain itself. And so that's what we want to get to. And then furthermore, it's going to grow a lot quicker on top, because if you plant something that's, say, a large tree, you're removing a lot of its roots when you dig it up and ball it. And when you put it in the ground, it's going to concentrate on equilibrium and it's going to grow roots, not the shoot. So your idea of putting it in big and seeing it get big, it's not going to get big. It's not going to grow on top for a couple of years because it's got to make up for the mass that it lost on the bottom. So we plant small here. So this is the perennial walk we just planted last year. You can see the sizes of plants we put in April. And this is a picture of how it looks using the squeegee method and the right plants 4 or 5 months later in August. So real quick growth. Just like the gentleman said, he said in the front here, he said somebody put in their squeegee and they put in the plants, and boy, it happened really fast and it looks really good. And the garden's there. So that's all really for right practice. So again, it's really about soils, right? And it's plant small, but now let's talk about right plant, right place. So what I see in the field is a lot of folks just choose plants because they're familiar with them. Oh, I know this plant, I'm going to buy it. Or it's in an industry case or commercial application, people buy plants because they're readily available in large quantity. So a lot of commercial installations, if you get a new homes being built, they'll buy things that are just, oh, we can get thousands of them and they're available. And then also sometimes we want to plant a plant because it's meaningful to us. Maybe our grandmother had a lilac and we want one, or maybe there's just a certain plant that we have a feeling for. But I would argue that largely we are planting plants because we're not aware of better options. And so again, I've created a plant list for you, and I think you're going to be really excited to learn about that plant list because there's a lot of plants on that to choose from. But first, before we go to the plant list, I want to mention Plant Select. Who here is familiar with Plant Select? A couple people? Some people not. Plant Select is a program that CSU and Denver Botanic Gardens, we work together to study plants. We go to different parts of the world, other steppes regions. So we go to South Africa and Mongolia and Patagonia and bring things back to broaden our palette so that we can grow more plants. And then we also sometimes will hybridize or select plants for certain genetics so that they're the most ornamental plants. Then we run them through a rigorous criteria to make sure that we're not selecting something that's weedy or invasive or has diseases or insects or has some kind of problem. And once it passes muster, it gets into the program if we vote it in. This website is extremely helpful. If you've never gardened before, this is a great place to start because we've already tested the plants and they're almost like kind of dummy proof, right? You can see the Plant Select tag. It's a marketing thing. So you'll be able to go shopping and see if it says Plant Select, you can probably get away with putting in your cart and having it live, especially if you use squeegee. There's about 200 plants in Plant Select program right now, and we're continuing to add every year. So this is the plant list I'm going to give you. It'll be emailed out, but what you see here is there's a couple different pages, right? So I put together xeric, natives, and steppe all in one thing. So full sun plants that are super xeric. So they may be native, they may not be, they may be steppe, they may be just a just a full sun dry loving plant. But this is the longest list that I have for you. There's a ton of plants on that. And then I also have a dry shade section because that can be a really hard place to garden. What do you do in dry shade? And then I'm going to give you a list of traditional dry loving plants, and I'll talk about what that means, and then high elevation plant lists. But what I want you to note here, so you've got The genus, species, cultivar, common name, and then water use. This is a unique category. There is no real USDA zone of water uses out there. This is me saying, I think this is about how much this plant is going to need based on all of the folks I work with in horticulture, which is about 30 other people in our department. So you'll see it says moderate, dry, or xeric. What does that mean? So to me, what that means is after 2 full growing seasons, after you plant, if a plant is xeric, you can turn off the irrigation, stop leaving it on a regular basis, and only water when it's totally hot and dry. So late August, maybe July, depending on the season. You want to pay attention to the weather. Is it windy? Is it sunny? Did we just get rain? Really have to stay attuned with what's going on. If it's a dry loving plant, it's going to like 1 inch of irrigation per month throughout its lifetime. That generally means if you put out a cup and turn on your irrigation, you can find out how long that means in terms of run time if you have overhead. If you have drip, you can simply take the drip unit and put it into a cup and see again, how long is that run time? I would average say you probably want to water for 15 minutes once every 2 weeks in May and June. And then in July, you want to up it, maybe 3 times that month. And in August, maybe every week, maybe same with September. And then, but this is all, your irrigation is specific and what the PSI is and what the valves are. That's all sorts of it can be a whole other thing. So this rule of thumb is 15 minutes once every 2 weeks when it's not that hot. And when it is hot, maybe you go once a week. Feel the soil is the best thing I can tell you. If you like gardening, you should be out there anyway and just stick your hand in the soil. If it's moist, do not water. Do not water. If it's bone dry, that's when you water. Only when it's bone dry. Most of the time I see people overwatering and killing plants. And then again, moderate is 2 inches or maybe up to 3 inches per month. So Kentucky bluegrass usually takes about 4 to 10 inches a month. So if you think about doing a transition, you're going to save almost 50% immediately and that much more, plus not mowing and putting pesticide and fertilizer down. Okay, so let's talk about plants. Xeric plants, typically that's just any plant that is adapted to dry conditions. So it doesn't have to be native, it doesn't have to be a steppe plant, it's just a xeric plant. It could be from the Mediterranean in cases of Centranthus, California poppy here. And generally speaking, you can tell a xeric plant because it will have very fine leaves. These are adaptations to stop evapotranspiration. So silver leaves, leathery, waxy leaves, hairy leaves, all of those kinds of things sort of reflect and stop water from leaving the plant. So that's on the first list. I've also included xeric plants that are native. And when I say native, I mean native to North America. Plants don't care where the borders of Colorado or where Denver is, they don't care. So if it's from the Western North America, and really Western is key because as soon as we cross the Mississippi, things change. So when we start using plants like, for instance, Echinacea purpurea, which is native to Eastern North America, it's a wet foot plant. It likes wet feet. It grows in marshes. How many marshes do we have around here, right? So same with Rudbeckia. That plant, if you use the Goldstrom, which is the most popular, that's a wet foot plant. So is Laetia spicata, often used, kobold, wet foot plant, guys, wrong plant. So what we can do instead is we can pick the right species because we have special species that love being here that have the same beauty, but they're actually not going to take as much water. So Echinacea angustifolia, Laetia punctata, and Rudbeckia hirta, pictured on the right. And then xeric plants that are native to steppe regions. So this is where Plant Select comes in. These are 2 plants from Plant Select. One is the red hot poker or Nephophia caulescens. And the second one, Paniota brought back, it's Delosperma or ice plant. And both are really unique looking, very colorful, sort of exotic. And that's one of the things about living on the Front Range is we can grow stuff that, while we may not grow Echinacea purpurea, this doesn't grow very well in, say, Tennessee or New York. So we have some really unique plants that nobody else can grow, and I think we should leverage that, embrace it, show off a little. So then we talk about traditional dry loving plants. This is for the gardener that doesn't want to have a Western look, that is very averse to, hey, I grew up in Minnesota and I want this. There's lots of plants that will do really well here as well. So lavender is a great traditional plant. Iris, do wonderful. Yarrow, wonderful plant. Lilac, peony, roses. There's tons of things that if you don't want it to look this certain way, you can use the fine mulch, so you don't even have to have rock going on. And then you can use these plants that actually like dry, because there are some plants that we can't do over here very well. So now you have a list of the traditional dry loving plants. And then dry shade is always a challenge. But there's actually a lot of great plants for this too. Brunera is pictured here. We have a ton of it in our Shady Grove area, and it's gorgeous come April and May. Come out and see it. It's beautiful. It does seed around. It's a ground cover. There's lots of different varieties of it. Then we've got dogwood. A lot of people put dogwood in full sun. That's a no-no. It actually likes wet feet, but it will thrive, and it is native to Colorado, but it's native to shady areas. So if you ever go hiking, especially along a river, if you go along the Platte and it's shady, you'll see this plant. You'll see some type of cornice. So it likes shade if it's going to be out here. And then Mahonia repens is another great plant that's really underused. Instead of using a boxwood, instead of using a yew, which won't do here, this is a broadleaf evergreen, and this is the fall color on the bottom right of what that looks like. A really nice plant. And then high elevation. If you have a home up there, or if you have friends up there and they don't know what to plant, things that you have to think about besides fire-wise plants is you need to think about the season being shorter. And so you want to plant things that bloom earlier, and you have to think about how much cooler it is. So there's a lot of plants that we can't grow on the Front Range, like delphinium or lupin, that will thrive up in that cooler area. So there's a whole list of those. And keep in mind that whatever elevation you are, whether it be 7240 or 8,000, that is not as important as your little valley and the kinds of conditions you get. Some areas are windier, some areas get more snow. So you really need to understand the area that you live in. And my thought would be everything on this high elevation list is up to 8,000. So I wasn't playing around. I was like, yeah, this is going to make it. So, so hopefully that's helpful for you guys too. And again, you can use squeegee for all of these plants. Meanwhile, it can be hard to find some things. We do have a few great local garden centers, but if you do end up going to a big box shop and you're looking for something, you might find some of these plants and they're great. So we've got butterfly flower, scabiosa, which is the purple on the top. The yellow is Coreopsis lanceolata. A lot of Coreopsis out there, they're not all made equal. The lanceolata is native. Those both bloom from May through October. Great hardworking plants. Echinops, globe thistles on the far left. Very unique, cool looking plant. It's all over our perennial walk. We're seeing yarrow here. And then Baptisia, which is a new plant coming out into the market, and I'm seeing lots of new cultivars. It's a really beautiful, almost looks like a shrub. Gorgeous plant. So we talked about this, lots of plants that like wet feet. None of these are going to be on my list. But if you have any of these in your garden, you might want to rethink just removing that mulch away from them first thing, if you like them, and putting the squeegee down, because it will help them get the water that they need. So Echinacea, Rudbeckia, Miscanthus is maiden grass, Pennisetum is fountain grass, Nightenbark is Physocarpus, and Spirea is Spirea. And then I would say Hemerocallis or daylilies, pretty overused. We can do something different. Same with the Karl Forster grass, really overused. We can do better than that. There's lots of choices out there, and this list will hopefully give you the tools to pick the right plants. So I'm going to switch gears and talk about seeding and natives. This is a great way if you have a large area and you want to do something economical. buy some seeds. Just remove the turf. You don't change the soil. You don't put the squeegee down. Native plants are native plants. And especially if you start them from seed, they're going to be just fine. If they really truly are native. And I like to use a garden mix that's called the High Plains Shortgrass Prairie Mix. It's from Western Native Seed, but there's also Applewood Seed. There's lots of seed providers that are local. But if you use something that's native to our region, you literally just put the seeds down. And a lot of these plants will self-sow. You can also put them in your garden to fill holes. But I would say you want to seed in the fall because that allows the seeds to scarify and stratify. So it gives them a little time to get cold and get eaten if they need to get eaten. Some seeds require certain things for germination. So by putting them down in fall, you allow for that. And then come spring, those will pop up. And you also want to make sure that you're really allowing good soil contact, soil and seed contact. So when you seed and you sow, sometimes you can put sand in the bag to help evenly spread it. And you also may just want to stomp over it or run your rake over it backwards. Just really make sure those seeds are touching the soil. And then you water in the spring until they germinate. And you can do this with grama or buffalo grass. You can do it with wildflowers. But know that the grama and the buffalo grass are warm season. And so they're not going to start growing until July. So don't water those. Seed them in the fall and then water in July. Because until that ground warms up, those plants aren't going to germinate. The seeds aren't going to germinate. That's why they're warm season grasses. And then just if you haven't heard about dog tuff, this is one of my favorite grasses because it really is dog resistant. Your dog can do whatever and the grass is just totally fine. Kelly Grummins created this grass. It's a Bermuda grass. It's a creeper. And you plant it in plugs. And after like one season of watering it 2 inches a month, it's good to go. Pollinators, bees love it. Bees love this grass. And you don't have to mow it if you don't want to. You can mow it if you like, but otherwise you can just let it go and just mow it once in the spring to get it going again. This is a warm season grass. So you want to plant this in June and or July. As late as October is okay. And you can get a cute little dog like that. So we'll talk about trees briefly, and then we'll close. Trees are tough out here. We talked about how trees really kind of tend to grow along waterways. That's just what they need. They need more water than what we have. There's very few trees that will survive and thrive on 14 inches of precipitation. So you can see the map, the mountains, we've got trees. But right in front of that, that's the Front Range, and we really don't have too many. So when we plant trees, I'm gonna recommend that you use squeegee. You can use compost, but I want you to use the squeegee there too. When we did the perennial walk, we actually bare rooted the tree. So we took the B&B tree, the balled and burlap tree, removed the ball and burlap, removed all the soil, and had it rinsed off and then put it in the squeegee mix. And we think it's going to be fabulous because now it's not stuck in a soil that it likes and it's used to and doesn't want to grow out of. So when you bare root a plant, you allow it to totally adjust to its new environment, and it's not going to stay stuck in this comfortable root zone where there's potting soil and rich soil, and then it goes out and there's nothing there. You can use compost. You can mulch with squeegee. You can use the fine mulch. It depends on the application. If it's in the middle of a xeric bed, just use squeegee. Don't make a ring of mulch within squeegee. If it's just in your lawn, use fine mulch. That's okay. Make sure you're planting it at the right height. Make sure you're wrapping these trees in the winter because sun scald, they'll crack, they'll break. It can be really difficult. And then we want to winter water as necessary. Trees will always require supplemental irrigation. If you have them in a xeric bed, you will continue to water them even if you're not watering the other plants. You want to water them at least once a month. If you've got existing trees, don't disturb the root zone, but you can plant underneath it and adjust the soil just like we would where we're backfilling with a squeegee. We want to use a fine mulch under existing trees because they like food. So even if you're using xeric plants, if it's going to be under a tree, you're going to use the dry shade plants most likely, and they'll be fine with that fine shredded mulch. These are the top 5 trees in a 50-year tree study that Al Rollinger did. He spent 50 years of his life looking at the tree species in and around Denver. And the top 5 trees, because 3 or 4 of them were quercus, are Kentucky coffee tree on the left, any number of different types of oaks. So oaks, always a good solid choice. Down below there, we have the Aesculus, which is a horse chestnut, or also Buckeye. And then we have golden rain tree, Coleroteria. And then Sephora japonica, which is in the elm family. And we have a bunch of them along the Josephine Street, if you want to see what those are. I forget the common name. If you want to click on this link, I'm going to send out this PDF and you'll all get a copy of it. And then there's also, these are live links, so you can learn about the Rollinger report. And you can also, if you want to really nerd out, buy that book, Durr's Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. Every hort nerd should have it. Here's a great tree for the Front Range. It's a pollinator tree. It's a great tree for habitat, and it actually does withstand just 14 inches of precipitation a year. So if you really want to plant a tree that you don't have to care for, this is it. It's not got all the ornamental values that you might want in a tree, but it's definitely going to survive. And it does, again, provide a ton of habitat. If you're going to plant a maple, maples tend to be, they're almost all native to East and Central US. They tend to be an understory tree. They like acid soil. They tend to actually grow underneath the shade of trees until they come up above them. So the only one that we like to recommend is this one that's from Mongolia, another step. It's the Hot Wings Maple from Plant Select. And the other one you can try is the Acer grandidentatum, the Rocky Mountain Maple, which is native to Western North America and the Rockies, but it is native to higher elevations. So if you're going to grow it down here, we want to put it in the east. We don't want to put it in the south and the west. We want to give it a little protection from the hot sun. A lot of people want to grow aspens, and I understand why. They're gorgeous, but remember, they really only occur at 6,500 elevation. So if you have to, you can try Prairie Gold. It's a cultivar that has been tried and true in Kansas. But better yet, I would say try the New Mexican Privet. It is very drought tolerant. It has a nice white bark and the yellow fall color. It's a small ornamental tree that would be similar to if you pruned up a lilac, or even similar to the Hot Wings Maple in form, but it's really lovely. It also has blueberries that the birds love. Okay, so I'm going to just wrap up with some before and after photos of some of the projects that we've done over the past few years. This is the before where we see mulch and a hedge, and it's really boring. And this is the after, right after we planted it. I'm going to be updating these slides in my website so you can see what it looks like this spring. So that's Cherry Creek North. This is the City of Evans Recreation Center where we removed 25,000 square foot of turf. And so the water savings are really significant. This is also right after the planting. So again, I've got to update these. This is the town of Severance where it's a right of way. You're not using that grass and you're just dumping water. So what we did was we removed that and we put in all sorts of pretty plants. And it's become a demonstration garden for their town hall. And I think that's it. So I'll take any other questions. I want to thank everybody for coming out and listening, and I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks so much. Any questions? Yeah. Fine mulch. What size is fine mulch? So fine mulch is going to be like a dime, the size of a dime and smaller, quarter maximum. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mexican privet, New Mexican privet, New Mexico privet, and it's a shrub, but it can get up to 15 feet, so it can turn into more of a small tree if you prune it up. Thank you. Yes.
You said you have a printout for us of these?
Yeah, Paige is going to send out an email with the plant list, and then I'm going to give her this document in PDF, so you'll have a copy of the presentation. Oh, well, maybe she could print it. It's 11 by 17. So if you do try and print it, it's really hard to read if you print smaller. So you might want to print a few.
Work on that.
Okay. Andy?
With not touch grass, one thing to wear, it's not very shape tolerant. So
That's right.
it doesn't have to go up to but you when he planted it, he had to choose between trees or replace it. So he lost the trees because he wasn't watering them anymore. So
So dog tough tree is definitely full sun plant only. It won't take any shade. Yes. You really want to remove, if it's existing Kentucky bluegrass, you really got to remove it because that is just so tough that and resilient that if you put plant dog tough plugs within that area, that will come back and take over. You might get a little section, but it's not going to be effective. You want to remove it. Anyone else? Okay, one more. Yeah, we have some examples of that at the gardens where we planted clover. It's a nitrogen fixer, so that's one of the reasons why it's beneficial. I don't know that it's super drought tolerant or incredibly hardy for foot traffic, but there's nothing wrong with seeding that in to your existing lawn. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Fruit bearing plants in a low water garden. Yes, I think there are, but I think there needs to be thought about the species. So I think ribes and gooseberry are one of the best things that will grow around here. They're native, but they like shade. They actually do best in shade, and you want to make sure you're feeding them something very organic. So organic fertilizer and or good compost mixed in with the squeegee and a fine mulch. I think it was just currant riberries. It's all RIBES. There's lots of different kinds. The other thing that might work for you is raspberry, but again, I would put that in shade. I would put it in shade and again, do the same treatment where you're feeding it. We do good with apple trees out here. So if you wanted to do a fruit tree, apple is great. You could try peach, but sometimes we get frozen. I'm not a real expert on lots of edibles, so.
I might butt in too. They're installing a food forest up at the Vietnamese Central Baptist Church on 26. Creighton Hoffenmeister with Denver Urban Gardens is working on that project up there and is probably the person to reach out to if you have questions about fruit trees or fruiting plants in this environment. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we're going to close it down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to close it down. I'll be around for questions, but thanks everyone on Zoom as well for joining us. And again, we're going to send out all this information for y'all that signed up. Thanks again.